their own people. It was a very strong statement that he made. Solomon Goldman, on the other hand, was effusive and excited about the potential for Jewish and non-Jewish cooperation in the United States that the pageant also asserted. And in his foreword to the original program, he started off by saying, "Thank God for Jewish Day. At a century of progress, on the eve of America's great day of independence, the Jew portrays his eternal romance, his romance with God, with life, with ideals." Despite the differences in tone and probably some of their ideas, all three of these men did believe in the to Allen put forward universalism in this Jewish American context of the pageant. So though varied in their opinions and styles, these three men revered Jewish culture and set Jewish history up as Zionist, expressed 4,000 years of Jewish history, Zionist. But he did Jewish history up as a paragon. The pageant's musical director, Isaac Van Grove, was not a practicing Zionist, but he did share these sympathies toward the Jewish people, and in him, Weisgall found an exceptional collaborator capable of composing a score that expressed 4,000 years of Jewish history and of directing over 3,500 performers. According to the pageant program, Isaac Van Grove started his career as an accompanist to well-known artists. And the ideas and the aesthetics of the romance were indeed cohering. Weisgall was managing to gather Chicago Jews who were geographically spread out. He described insofar as having something for everybody. Zionists, non-Zionists, the religious, the nationalists, everybody. But Weisgall's practical mission was to resuscitate Zionism in Chicago and beyond, and to raise concrete religious, the nationalists, everybody. But Weisgall's practical mission was to resuscitate Zionism in Chicago and beyond, and to raise concrete support for Chaim Weizmann's mission to rescue German Jewish scientists and resettle them in Palestine. So as you may recall, there had been a schism in the Zionist organization in the United States when a group following Louis Brandeis' leadership split from supporters of Chaim Weizmann. Weisgall was in the Weizmann camp. In 1921, Weizmann was elected president of the World Zionist Organization. He visited the United States and, together with Albert Einstein, undertook a fundraising campaign to advance the Zionist cause. In 1925, together with Lord Balfour, Weizmann inaugurated the Hebrew University of Jerusalem on Mount Scopus in Jerusalem. And he said on that occasion, quote, "We must create a high culture based on Jewish morality and make it a center of human culture." And indeed, that really describes the thrust of the pageant's content as well. That putting forward the narrative, the story of Jewish evolution from the beginning of time, really as human evolution, right, up to the redemption in Palestine, was the story, par excellence, of human progress. So placing great emphasis on integrating science and industry, Weizmann promoted the establishment of advanced enterprises such as the phosphates plant at the Dead Sea and the hydroelectric plant at Naharim. However, despite renewed growth, the Jewish settlement was afflicted by an economic crisis, and to overcome that crisis, Weizmann established the Jewish Agency in 1929. Though embattled in 1933, and he had by then resigned his post as president of the Zionist organization, Weizmann was still very much respected. And when Weisgall convinced him to come and speak before the pageant, his participation generated a great deal of interest among Jews in the United States that most likely would not have been generated. So it did help to build an audience. Walter Roth, to whom I am most indebted, relays the story of Weisgall's convincing Weizmann to be a part of the Jewish Day pageant in this way. Weisgall decided he needed a famous speaker to fill Soldier Field, with its seating capacity of nearly 100,000. Can you imagine? 100,000 seats to fill. I now live in Baraboo, Wisconsin. We have 12,000 people there. Everybody knows everybody. Can you imagine being in this group? Who was the most famous Zionist Jew in 1933, and a brilliant orator at that? Chaim Weizmann, of course. Weizgall telephoned Weizmann, who was living in London, and here's the description of it in Weizgall's autobiography. Weizgall: hello, Dr. Weizmann, this is Meyer in Chicago. Weizmann: was, bist du Meshuggah geworden? Have you gone out of your mind? Is Chicago on fire again? Weizgall: no, but it will be when you come here. I want you to come to Chicago for Jewish Day. Weizmann: what's that? Weizgall says, in parens, I explained as fast as I could. Weizmann: what's in it for the movement? Weizgall, with impressive emphasis and prayer in my heart, if you will come to Chicago for one day and make only one speech, even if for only 5 minutes, I will give you $100,000 for any Zionist fund you designate. Weizmann: put it in writing. So Roth tells us that Weizgall promised in writing, indeed, to raise $100,000 for Weizmann's Central Refugee Fund, which helped German Jews to settle in Palestine. And Weizmann agreed to come to Chicago. Weizgall warned Weizmann that he was limited to only one speech, and if he made 2 speeches, the fee would go down to $50,000. If he made 3 speeches, it was going to be reduced to $25,000. He was a very convincing man, Meyer Weizgall, and before he could set any of this into motion, however, he had one more person to convince, and that was the commissioner of the fair. And this was not necessarily either an easy feat. Rufus Dawes was a wealthy businessman, commissioner of the World's Fair. The Dawes brothers had many assets that they had acquired. In May 1933, Rufus was on the cover of Time magazine, which writing about the fair that opened on May 27th. And it mentions in the Time magazine article that when Rufus Dawes, as an American Jewish demonstration of collective will and historic destiny, the romance folded lofty American ideas into its premise for creating a new nation. The collaboration between Jewish nationalist aspirations and an American civilizing democratic mission was also symbolized in the very framing and dressing of the performance's playing area. The enormous expanse of Soldier Field greensward, and the stage was flanked, this is an image of the stage, according to Bennett, by avenues of 32 steel flagstaffs, from which swayed in the moonlight the blue and white banners of Palestine and the red, white, and blue of the United States. The picture, he added, was heroic. By the way, as you walked onto the main pathway of the fair, the Jewish Palestinian flag was not displayed with all of the other flags of nations there. It was, however, displayed in Soldier Field during the pageant on Jewish Day. And the young people who performed earlier in the day at the Hall of Science were carrying both American flags and Jewish Palestinian flags, which is the flag that we recognize today as Israel's flag. The pageant not only depicted history, of course, it also imagined the future, the redemption of the Jewish nation by its own hand through labor in Palestine. And here we see architect Samuel S. Oman's set design for the romance. This is a theatrical expression of the international style, white and geometric, a utopian tabula rasa. The Star of David illuminated atop the structure representing the temple in Jerusalem was a symbol of the eternal hope of the Jewish people, and at the same time, an impressive example of Western Electric's technical achievements. Now, a separate 2-level platform, which you see in the first picture here, this was floating in the foreground of the playing space, meant to resemble an altar, and atop the altar, to begin the pageant, an oversized Torah scroll was unrolled when the pageant began, framing the entire pageant as a kind of quasi-religious service that was read from the parchment of this Torah. The idol Molach, which you see in this other picture, and please excuse the reproduction of this from a Chicago Tribune article, This was one of the highlights of the pageant, and it's featured in one of the wonderful clips that we have here in the museum right behind us on these computers. I encourage you to take a look. You can see this scene in action. A Chicago Tribune writer reported on a dress rehearsal and described, it's kind of a fun story. It says, Judge Harry M. Fisher, General Chairman of Jewish Day activities, was a solitary figure in the vast expanse of seats during the dress rehearsal. He looked on transfixed as under the last of the drivers, 200 slaves was dragging the huge idol Molach to the stage, on which human sacrifices were to follow bacchanalian orgies. The judge looked at the hideous figure of Molach and some of the feeling of revulsion against idols, which has been built up during the 4,000 years of the history of his race, must have swept over him as he pointed his finger and exclaimed, "That damned thing cost us $8,000. The idol measures 27 feet high.
The question of why the World's Fair Pavilion is a state secret remains. What don't they want us to know?